Some agencies have an easier time with growth, even though they're operating in the same market as everyone else. They're dealing with the same noise, the same uncertainty, and the same shifting expectations that define agency life right now. And yet, growth doesn't press on them in the same way. It feels steadier and more focused, less reactive, less like something they have to constantly push uphill just to keep the business moving forward. When you see the divide and start to compare, the instinct is often to look at effort or discipline, to ask, am I doing enough? Should I be pushing harder? But that's not where the difference actually is. In this episode, I'm going to help you see three forces that explain the difference. Not tactics or tools, but conditions that shape whether growth becomes easier to carry as the business evolves, or more demanding with every step forward. If you're interested in growth that feels more sustainable and more intentional, let's dive in. Welcome to the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you want to grow an agency to 7 figures and beyond without working more hours in your business, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Audrey Joy Kwan. I know what it takes to build an agency, including supporting an agency owner in selling and exiting. I also have a master's degree in communications, specializing in organizational development. My team and I have worked behind the scenes of multiple 7-figure agencies and have coached and consulted with over 150 agency owners. All this to say, when you join us on the Small But Mighty Agency podcast, you get real world experience and practical tips that help you work less, earn more, and lead with integrity. So let's go. Hey friends, here's what I know from working closely with agency owners across different stages and specialties. Some agencies make growth feel easier. These agencies are operating in the same market as everyone else. They're dealing with the same noise, the same uncertainty, and the same shifting expectations that are shaping the industry right now. They're not insulated from change, and they're definitely not avoiding hard decisions. And yet, over time, growth behaves differently for them. It feels more stable, more energizing, less like something they have to constantly push uphill just to keep moving forward. Today's episode is about why. This is the third part of a longer series where I've been making sense of that difference and to name what's actually happening underneath it. In part one, which was a podcast episode, I focused on the felt experience many agency owners are having right now, what it's like to be doing well on paper while also feeling more stretched, more complex, and less grounded than expected. In part two, which was a blog post, I unpacked why that tension exists, not because agency owners misunderstood growth or failed to execute well enough, but because the growth model most of us inherited was built for a very different set of conditions than the ones agencies are navigating today. Both are linked in the show notes. And that brings us here. Once you see that growth through more no longer creates the kind of sustainability it used to, a more useful question opens up. That question is, what actually changes how growth feels over time and makes it easier? That's what we're going to explore in this episode. Not tactics or tools, but the underlying forces that allow growth to feel smarter, more intentional, and easier to carry forward. For a long time, growth meant adding more clients, more services, more people, more output. And for the environment that model was built in, that logic made sense. But what I'm seeing now, especially among agencies that feel lighter and more stable over time, is something different. They're not necessarily growing faster. They're growing in a way that compounds. And when I say compounds, I don't mean bigger or more complex. I mean this. A compounding business is one where today's decisions make tomorrow's growth easier, not heavier. There's less explaining over time, less convincing over time, and less friction every time a new opportunity shows up. That's a very different goal than expansion. And when I look closely at agencies where growth actually behaves this way, I don't see one silver bullet. I see 3 underlying forces at work. They tend to show up early, before a sale is made, before a decision starts to feel heavy, and long before growth begins to feel brittle. So in this episode, I want to name those forces, not as tactics, not as trends, but as conditions that allow growth to carry forward instead of constantly demanding more effort. Once we can see them clearly, the rest of the conversation starts to make a lot more sense. So if growth doesn't get easier by simply adding more, what actually makes it easier over time? When I look closely at agencies where growth feels lighter over time, regardless of size, I don't see a single tactic or strategy that explains it. Again, I see a set of forces. These forces aren't flashy and they're not always visible, but they change how growth behaves. The first compounding force, positioning that reduces buyer effort. It shows up in how quickly someone understands what you do, who you're for, and whether you're relevant to them. This is what I mean by positioning that reduces buyer effort. In crowded, noisy markets, the biggest cost for buyers isn't price, it's cognitive load. That's the effort of figuring out whether something is for them, whether you understand their world, and whether they're gonna have to explain everything from scratch. Most agencies underestimate how much energy that work actually takes. When positioning is doing its job, that work disappears. People don't feel like they're discovering you, they feel like they're recognizing themselves. They think, this is for me, they get my world, I don't have to translate. That moment of recognition matters more than we often realize because when someone recognizes themselves quickly, trust forms earlier, conversations start further along, and decisions feel easier. On your side of the business, something shifts too. You spend less time explaining what you do, less time clarifying fit, and less time qualifying opportunities that were never quite right to begin with. That's how positioning begins to compound, not by being louder or saying more, but by reducing the effort required to understand you. That's the first force, and it's often where momentum starts to show up quietly, long before it shows up in revenue. The second force is trust. Not trust as reputation and not trust as visibility, but trust built through point of view. Point of view is really two things. It's how you see the problem and it's the perspective and values you bring to the work. When someone understands how you think about their challenge, they're not just evaluating your capabilities, they're evaluating your judgment. They start to get a sense of how you'll approach decisions, what you'll prioritize, and where you'll push back instead of simply agreeing. In crowded markets, competence blends in. Lots of businesses sound capable, everyone promises good work and uses similar language. What differentiates you isn't how good you are, it's how you think. But that's only half of it. The other half is who you are. Point of view isn't just your take on the work, it's the beliefs underneath it. What you believe, what you value, and what you won't compromise on. It's the hill you're willing to die on. Before they choose to work with you, people want to know how you see the world, what kind of business you're building, and how you'll behave when there's pressure, especially right now. As markets get noisier and options multiply, alignment matters more. Clients aren't just choosing vendors, they're choosing partners, people they want to navigate uncertainty with. This is where many agencies hesitate. They try to sound flexible, reasonable, and easy to work with, but in trying not to alienate anyone, they end up standing for very little. And not standing for something is still a decision. When your point of view isn't clear, buyers take longer to decide. They need more conversations, more reassurance, and more time to feel settled. In a market where uncertainty is already high, that gap really matters. When your point of view is clear, both in how you approach the problem and what you stand for, the buying cycle shortens. People don't need as much convincing or as many touch points to feel confident. They come in feeling more oriented, more aligned, and more confident in how you think and how you show up. That's what separates you. That's how people choose you. That's momentum. And when you can name those things clearly, that's how trust compounds. That's the second force. The third force is fit, but not fit in the way it's usually talked about. Not just whether someone is a good client, whether you like working together or whether they respect boundaries. All of that matters and every thoughtful agency owner wants that. But that's baseline fit. If we stop there, this conversation doesn't really go anywhere. What actually compounds isn't just working with good people, it's choosing work that makes your agency better. Fit as a compounding force shows up in the opportunities you say yes to, the clients you take on, the problems you choose to solve, and the work that stretches you in the right direction. This isn't just about whether you're a good match, it's about whether the work strengthens who you're becoming. Every engagement teaches you something. The real question is whether it teaches you something reusable. Work that compounds sharpens your thinking, it deepens your methods, and clarifies your point of view. And this part really matters. It adds to your intellectual property. Over time, you're not just delivering work, you're building capability. That's the difference between growth that repeats itself and growth that constantly resets. This is also where fit often gets confused with niching. Niching answers the question, who do we serve? Fit answers a different one. It answers the question, which opportunities deepen our edge? Your intellectual property compounds when each client makes the next one easier. when each project strengthens what you can promise, and when your confidence grows because you've seen this pattern before. See, value doesn't increase by doing more, it increases by doing work that teaches you who you are at your best. That's why fit matters so much when you're thinking 3 to 5 years out. When I help clients grow strategically, we're not just asking, can we do this? We're asking something more important. We're asking, who does this make us? Because when the work you take on consistently strengthens your expertise, your insight, and your outcomes, growth stops feeling like a hamster wheel and starts to feel like focused direction. That's when fit becomes a compounding force, not because the clients are good, but because the work itself makes the agency stronger. That's the third force. When we step back and look at these three forces together, a different picture of growth starts to emerge. Not growth defined by doing more, adding more, or constantly expanding for the sake of it, but growth that feels both exciting and easier to carry forward over time. It's growth that's sustainable because it's grounded. It's growth that reduces friction instead of creating more of it. And it feels smarter rather than heavier because it's built on decisions that reinforce each other instead of competing for energy and attention. That's really the heart of what we've been talking about in this episode. Positioning helps the right people recognize you more quickly without you having to explain yourself over and over again. Trust built through a clear point of view helps people feel confident choosing you without endless convincing or hesitation. And fit ensures that the work you take on actually makes your agency better over time. So each engagement strengthens your capability instead of resetting the learning curve. Together, these forces aren't about changing how you work or pushing you into some unfamiliar model. They're about helping you work smarter in a market that's noisier, more uncertain, and more demanding than it used to be without asking you to burn more energy just to keep pace. This kind of growth isn't about shortcuts or efficiency for efficiency's sake. It's about being intentional. It's about making choices that build clarity instead of complexity, confidence instead of pressure, and momentum that actually feels worth carrying forward. And this matters now because the agencies that are going to thrive in the coming years aren't necessarily the ones doing the most. They're the ones making clear decisions about who they're for, what they stand for, and what kind of work is actually worth saying yes to. If there's one thing I hope this episode leaves you with, it's this. Growth doesn't have to feel like a constant push uphill. It can feel like direction, it can feel like focus, and it can feel exciting again because it's aligned with the kind of business you actually want to build. In the next part of this series, I'll start to bring these forces together into a more intentional model for agency growth, one that's designed for where the industry is headed and for the kind of agency many of you are building right now. But for now, it's enough to pause and notice where your agency is already working smarter and where a few more deliberate choices can make growth feel lighter, clearer, and more sustainable over time. That's where the change really begins. Again, thanks for being here, and I'll see you on the next one. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me at the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app and share it with a friend. I'll see you on the next one.